Okay, welcome to the online causal inference seminar. Today we have Chao from Microsoft Research who will talk about towards causal foundation models, duality between causal inference and attention. As a discussant, we have Zhang, who is a collaborator of Chao. Questions today will be handled by Sarah, so maybe she wants to say a few words.
Okay,
No?
so sure. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A panel. And if there are short clarifying questions, I may try to interrupt Chao, depending, or Jiaqi can also answer them directly. And if there are longer questions, we can discuss them maybe in the end after the discussant, right? Okay, sounds good. Oh, so shall you introduce Chao, Dominic, or we just start like this? Okay, we just start like this. So Chao.
Oh, sorry, maybe you didn't hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Chao, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, then I can get started then. So, thanks a lot for your time, everyone. So it's really good to be here today, and on behalf of especially the Causality team from Microsoft Research Cambridge, and present to you our recent research paper, which essentially shows our first steps towards building a causal function models. So which is a concept that we will introduce later. But essentially, I just want to start by setting up the scene. As everyone knows that since the beginning of last year, right, we have really witnessed a remarkable advancement in the entire field of AI, especially driven by larger, foundation models like large language models. So at the same time, we've seen a new kind of like formalism of solving problems, like using foundational models, that is using one single model that's capable of generalizing to a wide range of different tasks, right? So given that, one natural question raised by many researchers in the field is that, given this progress, can we safely claim that it's scale all you need to build a powerful model, or an AGI, although I don't really want to use that word. But, to answer this question, this really depends on the context and perspective. So obviously, we are a causal team. So one important unsolved question is how to understand, cause and effect in foundation models. So like one obvious example is the video generation, because currently the main methodology and models that we use to perform this kind of task is still based on next token prediction and association-based learning. So naturally, they will have a limited understanding of the world, despite of those amazing detailed video samples. So they might generate samples in the end that does not make sense to human. So talking about large vision models is just one thing, but they're not the entire story, right? So because beyond generating pretty videos using large vision models, there are also far more crucial applications to it that makes causality very important for foundation models. So for example, in gene editing, in the neurotechnology, in embodied AI, or in policy making, urban design, etc., I can go on. So the problem of solving causality is so fundamental that once your model, can't understand the consequences of your action, of your intervention, then you can already pretty much achieve your desirable impacts and results. And especially on solving this kind of novel and unsolved questions in different fields. So now back to the question that we raised in the beginning: is scale all you need? So to answer that, so we believe that it is also important to build foundation models that can understand causality. So if you try to map out where we are, right? So in terms of the set of current foundation models, so we can say that they mostly lie between the first and second ladders of prose ladders of causality. So mostly they're based on associative reasoning, and for certain classes of models that we have right now, they can also perform interventional predictions, but not for counterfactuals in general. So this is where our causality comes in. We are now really focusing our efforts to build a causal foundation models that is capable of solving tasks across 3 different layers. So of course, this is a non-trivial question because causality on its own is a very hard field. It's a very difficult field, and we think that it's unlikely that this type of picture can be achieved by trivially like the scaling up your models. So we'll talk about why later on. But in this talk, right, I'm going to address 3 different kind of aspects. So to start with is why we think that causality is a unsolved question in modern foundation models. And then why this goal like requires a different approach in terms of building causally-aware foundation models. And finally, we're going to show you one of the approaches that we have found that might be helpful towards building this type of causally-aware foundation models. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about challenges that we face right now and why causality is still a unresolved question in modern foundation models. So what are the challenges? To understand where we are, people have been trying to, let's say, benchmark the causal performance of, pre-trained large multimodal models, right? And, people have found that, at current stage, right, these current large models, it still struggles with even the simplest form of causal questions. So what it means is that the type of questions that is based on empirical and semantic understanding of domain-specific knowledge or common sense of human. So let me give an example. So here, let's say we have 2 types of counterfactual reasoning tasks, one for video, the other one for language, for example. So in the video case, so for example, we can give a set of frames of objects interacting with each other, and we might ask a question that, what will happen if certain objects is removed, right? And how will this change the trajectories of other objects? And similarly, in the language space, so we can ask, given a factual event, for example, a slaughter slays a pig, then we might ask, what would have happened if the slaughter slain a person instead, right? So these are all simple, causal questions in the sense that, with a good understanding of, a common sense, a model might still be able to answer those questions even without possessing a pure causal inference capabilities. So this is exactly what people have found, but however, it has been shown by this recent benchmark study that even in the language space, like most models, except for GPT-4, they all underperforms for this type of simplest causal task. And when it comes to video understandings, right, it's more difficult, and none of our current models can produce satisfactory answers to different types of causal reasoning questions. So this results essentially showed where we are right now. So at least for now, our current foundation models, they kind of lack the capabilities to solve causal tasks consistently. And so I think that one missing piece behind that is the lack of pure causal inference capability, which means that can your model derive a quantitative causal laws given the data and evidence that it observes, right? So ideally, what we want to achieve is that given a set of, let's say, observations from a complex system, let's say a cell system, where you have observations across different shops across the globe, and then you have observations on their revenues and their discount strategies, for example. So now I want to understand the causal effects of my strategy. And then a causal model should be able to naturally utilize certain causal assumptions and trying to deconfound and debias your data and your evidence. And then it can produce causal predictions by making counterfactual or intervention predictions on what would have happened if you have done a different strategy or discount level in this case. So think about this. So this kind of achievement or goal is fundamentally different from how current foundation models are built. So regardless of their capabilities of understanding causal questions, but the key point here is that the type of answers that it can provide is very different from what we expect. So for example, I can ask GPT-4, let's say, in my cell scenario, so what are the causal impacts of certain action? Then it can only like answer the questions qualitatively. So for example, like this typically increases the revenue, etc. And then you might ask, can you further quantify that effect? And then most likely, you can answer that, perhaps recent studies suggest a interval of 10%, blah, 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 something like that, right? But that's different from what I expect from a causal model, because the causal model should be able to return a quantitative and mathematical model that actually can describe the underlying causal laws, and more importantly, can guide you directly to optimize my actions in the future in an accurate way. So I think this is the area where like causal models and foundation models can make a real world impact. So I guess that's the first challenges that we're facing with our current foundation models. And the second one is about the capability of understanding of answering, novel causal questions. So for example, you might be launching a whole new like intervention strategy to boost your sales, right? And improve your business. But now you want to understand how this will impact my goal, which is my revenue, like in the future, right? And then I can ask GPT-4 to on this question, and the answer that I got is that it doesn't really have access to the case studies results about this new interventions that you are launching. So you cannot basically get any answers, or at least meaningful answers. But on the other hand, a causal model should at least, on a certain extent, be able to still generalize to novel scenarios like this. So this is something that our team actually did in the past. So we actually have a small scale of data sets, right, of a new intervention that we're trying to launch in the future. And we use our causal model, which is a causal deep learning model, trying to recover its causal effect, which is actually shown in the green bar here. And it turns out that our causal prediction is actually very accurate when it compares to the pink one, which is actually the large-scale real-world experiments, and it's actually randomized experiment that we gathered afterwards. So this shows the capabilities of causal models, and it also shows the second challenge that the current foundation model is facing, which is how can you solve unseen a novel causal questions. And finally, the final challenge I want to talk about is the kind of like the scaling law. So I guess one of the challenges that we have is there's no evidence in terms of scaling laws on the performance of foundation models in terms of their capability to answer causal questions. So researchers have tried to benchmark the capabilities of different, let's say, language models, right, based on their capability to infer causation relationships from correlation relationships. So they tested over a wide range of models from randomized baselines to BERT to Llama to GPT-4. And unfortunately, as the sizes of your model increases, their causal performance does not significantly improve. So that was becoming, potentially problematic, because this might suggest that, now we might be losing one of our most powerful weapons in terms of building large models to perform causal tasks. So, so there's also a lot more evaluations that conducted in the literature, but I guess the main takeaway that I found is that, so we found that, these kind of large multimodal models, they can perform amazingly well on certain types of causal questions, but they're just not super consistent. And they especially struggles with quantitative predictions and in terms of the pure causal inference capabilities. And also there's no kind of like the evidence of causal version of scale at all. So we believe that, one of the common reasons behind this is that, current foundation models by construction, they are not able to model the actual physical or quantitative data measurements to ground their predictions. So how to address that? So to build a causal-aware foundation models, I think there are two approaches in general. So one is that you take a causal model, right? Or the causal framework that is based on, let's say, potential outcome, structural causal models, etc., that already solve certain causal tasks under certain assumptions, and then try to make it foundational. The other approach is that you take a model that's already foundational but not causal, let's say a language model, right? And then trying to make it causally aware. So in fact, our team explored both, but in this talk, our strategy is kind of a mix of a little bit of from both sides. So let's talk about our proposed approach. So to start with, let me remind you how a normal large language model is trained. So to start with, we assume that we're going to have a true world model. And in this case, it's going to be a hypothetical ground truth data generating process, right? So then now this kind of like the ground truth world model is going to generate a bunch of measurement data sets in different domains, that the human can gather and analysis, right? So over the years of development and advancements of our humans' knowledge about our world, we start to summarize our kind of like the knowledge from those observations that we have from our world, and we summarize into textual statements in the end, right? And finally, we use those statements as a source of training data to train our large language models. And now, what we're trying to say is that now that we know that this approach is not able to model the actual physical and quantitative data measurements that we have to ground the predictions, so then why don't we directly build a new financial model that is trained entirely on all the quantitative data sets in the world, right? And with the goal of trying to make the correct causal predictions, right? So then if that can work, once such model is trained, we can then take any kind of like a new unseen data sets from a new problem, say your proprietary sales data, into this model. And this will then try to give your quantitative cost predictions about your unique system, which is specified in your proprietary data. And then all the predictions will be done in zero shot, meaning that this model is not retrained or readapted to new data. So now this is becoming interesting because the same formulation can be applied to new problems in other domains as well, like perhaps in unresolved questions in health and scientific areas, etc. So now, next I'm going to show you, so having this kind of mindset, like how are we going to address that? And especially one of the results from our group that we derive in this particular paper that will help to build such causal financial model. And the results is what we call the duality between causal inference and attention. But before we actually do that, so let me start by describing this result on a high level. So essentially, this result tells you that under some assumptions, the problem of learning a attention-based model, given a certain measurement data set that you have, is or can be mathematically equivalent to the problem of finding the kind of like the optimal causal predictions that minimizes certain types of error between your cost predictions and the ground truth cost quantity. And in fact, these two problems are equivalent to each other, meaning that they are dual problems. So the like the attention optimization problem is actually a dual problem of the original kind of like the optimal causal prediction problem. So we'll talk about this in more details in its exact mathematical form. But on a high level, because attention-based mechanism is so fundamental in modern, financial models, and we believe that these connections might be essentially exploited in the future to enable training a causal financial model. So before we go into more detail, so we will actually try to briefly introduce two preliminary concepts, just to make the talk a little bit more self-contained, right? The first concept is a optimal balancing, so which can be think of as in a sense, a generalizations of inverse probability weighting, where basically you start from existing data set, which is your observation data. Of course, you're going to have some confounding. The distributions will be different between your control group and treatment group. And the idea of optimal balancing is essentially to apply some kind of weighting, alpha, right? Which is used to like rebalance or reweight each of the data points. And then after reweighting, if you have chosen your kind of alpha wisely, then you will reach a new distribution, a rebound distribution that can approximate the A/B randomized testing very well, under which the goal of recovering causal effects becomes trivial, right? So to be more specific, so essentially, we have a data set of this format where you have X being your covariates, T the treatment, Y your outcome, right? And then you also have, we use the notation W to also sometimes to denote the rescaled version of treatment, because treatment usually by 1 it means treatment and 0 means control. Here, if we use W and W equals to 1 means that it's treatment, and then W equals to -1 means it's in a control group, right? So you have data sets in this format, and then you can define the true average treatment effect, which is the difference between your expectation of your different versions of potential outcomes. And then your optimal balancing, causal effect estimator is defined as the following, right? So which is basically the difference between a weighted sum of your treatment group and your control group, which is weighted by your balancing weights. So this is your kind of estimator, and your goal is to derive a optimal estimator with the optimal weights. So that's the first concept I want to cover. And the second concept is about attention, because our result involves certain understandings of the basic attention mechanisms, especially used in, for example, large language models. So let's say in the language processing context, usually you have a context, right? You have your query, which could be the questions that you have asked to your language models, or simply a continuation of your conversation. So now your goal is trying to predict the next token of your response. An attention mechanism can be think as a advanced way to achieve the goal of predicting the next token. So the way it works is trying to mimic the selective, attention mechanism of a human or biological systems, where based on based on your query, it's going to look back into each token or each word in your, context in your history text, and then it will calculate some sort of similarity scores between your query and each of your tokens in your context. So then finally, if you somehow choose to focus on only those high importance tokens that have higher scores, right, in terms of similarities. And then what happened next is that, so you focus on these high importance tokens, and then they will map into some sort of high dimensional, numerical embeddings that can be trainable. So actually call these embeddings the value tensors, which is going to be very important in the rest of the talk. So what happened next is that, all these values between all these high importance tokens will be weighted by all these similarity scores that you obtained before into a single output, which is used to predict your next token. And you train the whole system, end to end, and predict the next token of your response. So this is how attention works in general, but mathematically speaking, it's very simple. So you have a source-max function, which is actually your measurements of similarities between your query and your key, right? And then you reweight your value matrix by your similarity scores and obtain your kind of output. So now we're talking about attention in language space. But in our work, we're trying to focus on quantitative data, let's say a table, right? So in this context, so we use attention in a similar but different way. So instead of attending of language tokens, now essentially we take the entire table of data as the input. And let's say that we want to, let's say we choose one particular row, let's say the row 6 of some data, we treat it as query. And all the other rows as context, right? And then somehow we can still calculate certain, types of similarity scores, which will be used to reweight your value matrix of different rows. And you treat different rows as a separate token. And by doing so, you can use all the contextual information of other rows in your data sets to predict whatever quantities that you want. That's relates to your row 6 of your query. Let's say. So given the backgrounds of these two preliminary concepts, now we are able to formally state our results, right? So essentially, this results say that you can start from fitting a let's say a transformer-based model with a proper attention mechanism, basically trying to attend over your input quantitative data set. And then you turn this to your optimal solution. And what it does is that it's going to map a training model. It's going to map each row of your data set to a certain kind of like value tensors, which are used to predict certain quantity. So actually here, we're training the model to predict W, which is essentially your rescale treatment. And what happened next is that, okay, now you can actually show that after training, so all these different like the value tensors that you append, they are essentially directly proportional to the optimal alpha that we talked about before. So recall that this alpha will be used to rebalance the data sets and kind of like produce causal effects estimations. So now this theory tells you that after training, this kind of value tensors can be directly be used to reweight your kind of like the data points, and it will be optimal in the sense that it will maximize or minimize a certain causal prediction error that we will introduce later. But essentially, more mathematically speaking, so what we're trying to say is that technically you are using, so we call that we have a softmax query context. So here is your kind of like the attention here, right? So now you have wrapped your attention using a hinge loss, right? Which is a classification loss. And also we have another loss term, which is this term here is a kind of like a regularization term, which try to encourage your learned like the value tensors to sum to 1, let's say. So in the end, you can directly read off your optimal causal balancing weights by this particular equation, and your estimations of causal effects can be done trivially by just subtracting the related expectation of your prediction outcomes. So now, perhaps I'll just talk about a sketch of the proof of how we arrived this result on a higher level, right? So recall that we have some data sets of this particular format. We have X, T, and Y, covariate string outcome. We have the ground truth ATEs, and we have our auto balancing causal effect estimator in this form, right? And then what's happening next is that our goal is to try to minimize the expectation of our causal error, which is the difference between our causal effect prediction and the ground truth causal effect. And one thing here I'm missing is actually there should be a absolute value on your error, right? So your goal is now to minimize that, but the difficulty here is that you don't actually know the ground truth causal effect, because of course it's the well-known difficulty of causal inference, where given any fixed subject, right? So one of these kind of versions of potential outcomes will be unknown to us, right? So how to deal with that? So one common strategy is that now let's say that you have your potential outcome at 0, which is the control group, being unknown. Then what's happening is that you can essentially assume this function belongs to a function class called a reproducing kernel Hilbert space with a feature map. So it's a specific, very useful, well-expressive, function class. And then assuming that your, missing outcome is from this function class, and what it can do instead is that to minimize the worst case error by first doing the, supreme over your all the possible outcomes, f in your function class. And here your ground truth is actually, a function of your f. And then you minimize your optimal balancing weights alpha. So in this case, one can show that there will exist a lambda parameter such that this original kind of like worst case error will be reduced to the following optimization problem, which is very similar to support vector machine problems where you do this kind of like the optimization under certain constraints, and you also can define some type of kernel matrices, right? And the exact form of this doesn't really matter, but because it is just a intermediate result. But then you can further show that this, SVM kind of like optimization problem. So there will exist a feature map, phi, such that, recall that this type of optimization problems in SVM context, it's usually going to be, let's say, a dual problem, right? So it's going to have a primal version of this optimization problem. So then you can show that there is a it's a primal form, but we have the same optimal solution as the following optimization problem, which is essentially optimizing the objective that we talked about before in our duality result, where you have your hinge loss over your attention model, and you have your a regularization loss. And here, so your V is actually defined by this equation here, which is actually which shows you that under the optimal solution, your value tensor is going to be a function of your alpha and your NW and also your X, right? And your H here is just a normalizer. So what this essentially means intuitively is that, so in practice, both your value tensors and your key tensors in your attention network can be parameterized as a function of your input data set, which is a set of X. So given this, then you can train your attention-based model on your data set, and then applying hinge loss and your regression term, then you can arrive at your trend model in which we can read off your optimal balance weights, which is shown by this formalism, in which we call this method causal inference with attention, or CInA. So start from observation data, and then you pass your observational data to your pre-trained attention model that is trained using this particular loss. And then this pre-trained model will produce a alpha value in a zero-shot manner, which will be used to reweight your observation data. And after reweighting, you're gonna debias your data, and then you can directly estimate the causal effects without further model fitting. So everything can be implemented by a transformer-like architecture, if you like. So which essentially, in terms of implementation, is going to be very simple. So we just do amortization, right? Because we know that for each data set that we have, so it's going to be a corresponding optimal, unique optimal balancing weights. And then basically what we're trying to do in practice in our implementation is that we use this kind of like attention or transformer-based architecture to amortize all this kind of like knowledge, right? So we're trying to in general, predict the underlying, balancing weights given any data sets. So after training, so you can essentially directly read off the weights without, any model retraining using a single forward pass of your pre-trained model. So pretty much in the similar setting as other type of financial models. So now the main takeaway here I'm trying to talk about is that, so we've shown you one possible recipes to build causally aware model. This is trying to start by kind of like building the connections between attention problem and causal inference problem. And then we can directly apply attention or transform architecture on your quantitative data sets. And we train them with specific loss and mechanism. And then you can estimate your causal effects in their show. So now, so far, we've shown you how it works. And then we do have some experiments that shows how well it works. So we will have more kind of like comprehensive experiments that we have in our paper, but I'm going to highlight a few of them. So the first very successful application or experiment is that so it's a causal machine learning benchmark that we have, which contains thousands of different synthetic tasks that can be used to evaluate the performance of causal foundation models. So the idea here is to try to simulate how this type of causal foundation models will be used in real life scenarios. So we start from synthesizing, let's say 5,000 or even more synthetic tasks. So which is defined by you first randomly generalize different causal graphs, which corresponds to different causal mechanisms, right? So that we have different functions. You have different treatments and outcomes, right? So you have all this type of observational data sets from these different systems without the knowledge of their underlying causal graphs. And then you use only those observation data sets to pre-train our model. And then we also generate another 1,000 unseen synthetic tasks which have different causal graphs and different causal mechanisms. And then during test time, we can feed them into our causal foundation model. And then we can actually predict, make causal predictions about their causal effects. And then finally, you can do evaluation because of this are synthetic, and you do have access to the ground truth ATE. So so we can focus on perhaps the second column here, which is the 5,000 data sets that we want to highlight here. And then so we do actually achieve the state-of-the-art performance. So when comparing to a wide range of different state-of-the-art methods, right? And one thing I want to emphasize here is that all the other methods, right, they are trained on a per dataset basis, meaning that when you have a different test data sets, right, you need to retrain or re-estimate in the entire thing, right? Like DragonNet, ResNet, of machine learning. So you just do the training over again. But yet our method is still able to kind of like in general. So we have different versions, but in general, we can still do a pretty much very good job. And even considering that our model is actually a very lightweight one and can be trained in the matters of a days. So, and what's more interesting is that we've shown its capability to generalize to real-world data sets. So meaning that you pre-train this model on a purely synthetic data sets, right? And then we can take a real-world data set, which is the ACIC data set, typically used for causal benchmarking. And then you just perform causal inference zero shot without fine-tuning the model. And as you can see that we indeed still achieves the best performance across different models, even though the other ones they are all already tuned on this ACIC data set. So that's really interesting results. And of course, finally, so one benefit that you can get from this type of model is, of course, inference time, because so imagine that you want to engage in a very active, let's say, online advertisement types of causal inference tasks where you need to change or retrain adapt to your models all the time. And it's going to be a burden for engineering. But with this type of pre-trained causal inference machines, what we can do is that you can achieve a huge, reduction of your inference time because everything is just forward pass. You don't need to retrain the model, right? So this might lead to a number of different applications. So for the takeaway of the experiment part is that it kind of already validates the duality that we propose, which is causal inference attention, because in fact it works in practice. And it can perform causal tasks pretty good, and also the accuracy is state of the art across different popular benchmark baselines, and it is foundational, so it can do zero-shot inference, and it can generalize to unseen data sets, and which will also help to become a massive inference time saver. So finally, I just want to spend a few minutes to talk about extensions. So because currently, as you can see that there's a clear limitation of this work, which is that it focused on estimating, average effects, which is just a single scalar for, different data set. So for our follow-up research, we're working on generalizing to not just ATEs, but also individual train effects, counterfactuals, and causal discovery. So more recently, we do have follow-up work, which is called the fixed point approach for causal genetic modeling, which is under ICML review currently. So what it essentially does is that, as opposed to the potential outcome framework that we are, using in this particular talk, so now we generalize the ideas, to apply to this kind of like the structural causal models, formalism of causality, and we arrive at what we call the fixed point approach, which is the alternative viewpoint for structural causal models, under which you can map your counterfactual estimations and causal discovery to like a new type of attention models. And then, so we do, and also we have by far the most kind of like general identification results of counterfactual models, counterfactual distributions, given graphs, of your models. But essentially, I think that the point I'm trying to say is that we are working on different types of generalizations. And so this fixed point model is called FIP. So finally, just want to end with the roadmap of our future research. So now we have CInA in this talk trying to predict effects of actions. In the follow-up work, we have FIP, which is the structural causal model framework, in the foundational setting, and trying to learn the causal mechanisms and causal graphs, everything all together. But these are still like kind of like in a sense, toyish models. So in the end, we want to kind of like generalize and scale up to larger and more kind of like multimodality models to build what we can say causal world models in the end, right? So I think that's basically the end of this talk. So we're trying to push the boundaries of both areas from causal machine learning and modern like AI in terms of foundation models, and to join them together to form a new kind of type of model, which is a causal foundation model. And thanks everyone for your time, for listening, and kudos to all my collaborators for this paper. Okay, thank you. So I guess now we're gonna hand over to Jiaqi about on the discussion. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. Can I ask a quick question before we go to the discussion?
Yeah, for sure.
So for the training data, I was like, so you currently seem to use synthetic data, right? If you use synthetic data, then the model will probably only learn things where we already know with other procedures how to compute the ground truth, right? So for example, we know like ignorability based, you can do reweighting or AIPW or whatever to compute the causal effect. So is the goal to make that richer, or you could also, if you use real world data, then it's a bit trickier, right? Because if you use observational data, you don't know the ground truth. So if you use experimental data, then you don't need the reweighting anymore. So like, if you think about like, like making this broader and larger, like how do you do that? Like data.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a really good question. So perhaps I can talk about it more, because actually this is also one of the points I guess we want to discuss later on. So I guess for this particular one, I guess I just want to clarify that. So in our model, I think that at some point, so when we talk about the training, here. So actually, so we're not actually, so we are actually, there are two versions of the model, right? The first version is that, so you just, train everything unsupervisedly, meaning that you don't have access to experimental data. So you don't learn to actually recover the ground truth because you don't have the ground truth. So that's the kind of beauty of this duality results, because you just fit to your kind of like your predict your kind of like your let's say next token, in this case your W, using a value tensor. And then in this case, basically you don't have access to ground truth cause effects or the optimal weights that you have. So I guess that's the general idea that I'm trying to push. So is that although we're moving to foundation models where you try to relax certain requirements of theory or identification theory, but we still, like in the perfect scenario, still want your model to work perfectly well even without access to ground truths. And then on top of that, you might be optional to add some kind of like supervision signal where you do have a ground truth, let's say ATE, and this is the other version of the model, so which correspond to, let's say, here. So we have a ZS, which is zero shot, right? So which is purely unsupervised. And then we have like a ZSS. So this S means supervised, which means that you do have a certain access to the ground truth of your causal effect estimations. So as you can see, even without access to the ground truth, it's still working very well. But with that, you can even be better. So I guess that's the whole kind of idea behind this work.
Okay, thanks. So just one quick comment, but we can shelve that also. Like if you don't have access to the ground truth, then there might be many graphs like that represent different causal effects that give you exactly the same data set. So in that case, I'm not sure how you can learn, but we can shelve that for later. Maybe let's just switch to this discussion.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So I think there are a few remaining questions in the chat, but I will first go through my discussion slides, and then maybe Chao and I can try to tackle the discussion as well as the questions together.
I'm going to quit sharing. Okay.
Yeah. If you stop sharing, I can share.
Okay, Dr. Share, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. All right. So thanks, Chao, for the amazing talk. I'll be the discussant today. My name is Jiaqi. I'm a PhD student at MIT, and I did this work with Chao while I was interning at Microsoft last summer. So I thought it would be helpful to start the discussion by presenting a few summary slides of the key ideas behind this work, mainly like the key ideas of how I would explain to someone why the method works. So the main goal of CInA is to perform average treatment effect estimation, and how it does that is relying on this pretty well-established statistical method known as covariant balancing, which is basically a method when you are given observational data, you reweight different units in your data set to mimic or emulate some randomized controlled trials to estimate average treatment effect. And how CInA does it is basically relying on using attentions. So if we think about how attentions is usually used in prior works, for example, languages, we have a sentence of different words. We would tokenize each word and ask attention to attend to different words in the data set. And then this way, after the attention layer, we get a sentence level or contextual embedding of each word in the sentence. So the key idea behind CInA is instead of inputting like a sentence, we actually input a whole data set where we're asking the unit to attend to each other. This way, after the attention layer, we're actually getting a dataset dependent or a dataset level unit embedding. So to ensure that this dataset dependent unit embedding actually correspond to the optimal balancing weight, this comes to the second idea of CInA, which is essentially based on the two observations developed in previous works. One of these observations basically says you can rewrite the self-attention layer as a form of some kernel SVM. This is one key observation. And the second observation is if we actually assume that the outcome model belongs to some reproducing kernel Hilbert space, then you can use the kernel SVM problem to describe a way to solve your covariant balancing ways. So the second idea of CInA is basically trying to enforce the self-attention in my neural network to actually solve for the kernel SVM problem that correspond to covariant balancing. So Chao has talked a lot about how this is achieved, so I won't go into the details. But basically, after enforcing this through the loss function, you can then read off the solution of your covariant balancing from the attention weights. And I would like to comment nicely about this connection is that this actually allows you to do like arbitrary parameterization as long as the last layer of your transformer correspond to this self-attention that solves the corresponding kernel question. So this is basically the second idea of how you would use an attention network to solve for average treatment effect in a single data set. So then to move on beyond the single data set where we actually want to train on, say, like utilizing multiple data sets online to get a pre-trained model that works on a new data set. This relies on the idea of amortization, which is essentially saying that instead of solving this dataset problem each at a time, we're sharing the parameters of how to solve these problems using, say, for example, a set of parameters in a neural network. So this is like a way to parameterize, say, like the dataset to weights output. And once you have this shared weight, you can then on a new dataset directly use your pre-trained model to infer the weights. And this will be done by using just one forward pass. So this is like, I would say, the last key idea of CINA. And then we've seen a lot of empirical results. But I would just like to highlight two key empirical results in my mind. So there are a lot of results in the paper that shows that the correctness of this method in simulation or in real data set. But the one case where we're actually trying to make a case that this may be helpful in foundation model is try to see if we can actually generalize from synthetic data to real world data set. And this is the table that Chao showed where our method is able to perform quite well compared to a bunch of other baselines. And then this will also give you the instantaneous inference time benefit just because you just need this one forward pass instead of resolving the problems on the new dataset itself. So this is a bit of the summary of the whole work. And moving on to the discussion point, I would like to bring up. So the first point I think someone asked, which is also, I guess, my favorite reviewers question. So for the method itself, we've made a lot of assumptions in the work to try to make like the whole pipeline or in the implementation make sense in theory, and including this assumption on ignorability. Which I would argue that it would hardly be the case in the real world setting. But I don't think this is so much of a problem in the method in the paper itself, because in the empirical evaluations, Chao actually talked about this Erdos Renyi 5000 dataset, simulation dataset, where he's generating like 5,000 different graphs, and then actually those dataset has certain violations, certain degrees of violation to the ignorability assumption. So I think like if you have observed like all these different multiple dataset during training, and you have some supervision as what the ground truth ATE is, I would think like in some sense the model is able to implicitly learn to deconfound into the extent that it will allow you to actually do average treatment effect estimation. And there was also this previous work by Bennett and Klaus. The title of this work is Policy Evaluation with Latent Confounders via Optimal Balancing, which says basically if you have a latent confounder here, a latent confounder like unobserved covariates here, you're fine using optimal balancing as long as you have an approximate oracle to what the ground truth posterior of Z is given the covariant and treatment. So I think in some sense, this is kind of related to like the other popular trend in causality research recently, like causal representation learning, where you have seen a lot of data set and to what degree you would try to answer, we can identify the latency for our specific task. So this would be the first discussion point I would like to bring up. And the second discussion point is, so I think at the beginning, Chao talked a lot about like adapting current foundation model, large language models for different causality tasks. And he has discussed a lot about like the pitfall of this during this task. So I don't want to go into that direction of discussion. I would more like to discuss like if we actually want to build, say, like a causal foundation model from scratch, what would be, say, the right strategy to learn to scale up causal inference from like a data perspective. The reason I'm bringing this up is because so far the experiments that we've seen in this paper are basically all tabular data set. Basically, we're trying to come up with an approach on the tabular data set to do self-supervised learning in order to just transfer on a new data set. But however, in other domains, like for example, me being here at the Broad Institute, we look into a lot of single cell applications. there are a lot of in that domain. People are also dealing with tabular data set. But then this paper last year called Gene-Former in Late Nature, they actually, how they were building their model is actually transferring their tabular data set into something that look like languages. So in this tabular data set, they have cell by gene matrix where each entry of their tabular data set correspond to the expression of a gene in a cell. But instead of building a model from scratch or like coming up with new techniques, what they did is they just took one cell. After some normalization, they rank the expressed genes from in an ascending order and basically treat that as like a sentence description of each cell, and then use all the tokenization and mask retraining this transformed data set. In this domain, they were showing that this representation after the transformation they learned can be used for all different various downstream tasks. So I was wondering for our cases in general as well, should we actually be like developing new method on the tabular data set itself, or should we actually think about it in another perspective where we transform that into a more succinct, or say maybe in some sense more robust representation of our data, and then use the existing techniques on those transformations. So that's the second point I want to bring up. And the third point is, in general, how should we think about aligning this causality task with human preferences? So I think we've seen like reinforcement learning with human feedbacks to work really, really well in large language models, where you generate two different tasks, and then you ask the human to rank which one is better. And then using this robust feedback, you then update your large language model to more align with human preferences. So I was wondering, in general, for causality task, whether it's treatment effect estimation or structural learning, how should we really think about incorporating humans into this loop of updating the models? And the last point I want to bring up is if we actually believe in scales, I think we're never going to be able to get enough randomized trials, or maybe observation data we can have a lot. If we actually believe in scale, which I think we should, because I use ChatGPT every day, where exactly is the place that we can actually mine for more data? Should we actually be looking into this very realistic simulations? What are the caveats and opportunities there? Or there might be opportunity in the sales data that Chao mentioned at Microsoft, which is proprietary. And then there might be also like robotics examples where you have very realistic simulation, which is also, I think, a lot of causal representation learning works actually look into. Or maybe in biology, we have more and more interventions. And this is a picture I stole from my advisor slide, which is showing how much data is generated in the bio domain. This is one lab at the Broad, which generates more than 80 petabytes of data in the last decade, which is comparable to Twitter and also the entire Netflix movie corpus. So these are the 4 discussion points I would like to bring up. And also the questions, feel free to ask questions. I then hand over to Chao.
Yeah, okay, so perhaps I can talk about the first one, because like also relates to some questions in a chat about assumptions and data, and also relates to the 4. But I guess in general, I guess these are great questions indeed, and I think that it's also very a controversial topic in terms of how do you think of the assumptions in your kind of like the a model. So I guess in this unique foundational kind of setting, I think that these kind of offers a unique opportunities for us, at least for certain types of models, in which I think we can think of their assumptions differently, because like in verbal scenarios, there are all kinds of validation assumptions, but I guess these assumptions will still be useful, as I said before, in a sense, can be certain form of inductive bias, let's say. So these assumptions will help you kind of guide you to build the models and design structures, and under which, if the assumptions are satisfied, and also if your models trend like to the optimum, then like even with purely unsupervised setting, your model is supposed to work and to recover the underlying true causal effects. So this bottom line. But then this can also serve as a inductive bias in which you can take all the data sets that you have, but they might violate the assumptions for sure. But still, because of the fact that you can compensate that with perhaps additional kind of like the ground truth effects that you are available to help you to actually like improve the model. So I guess in this particular formalism, so this is very demanding in terms of that you need a model that's both flexible and also needs to have certain types of guarantees that it should work, even without surprise data. So I guess that's my main takeaway. So in terms of the 4, that's also similar. So when we get more data, so there are lots of data out there. I guess in terms of at least for this work, in terms of tablet data sets, there are just a lot of tablet data sets in the world that's not explored. I guess a lot of them being proprietary is one of the problems, but I guess as long as the models is compatible with kind of semi-supervised learning with certain kind of like causal principles, then I guess this might work, especially for the robotics setting, because our group has been looking into this, especially embodied AI settings a bit more, because this is where causality becomes very prominent. And then yeah, we do have a precision paper to quote for this. Just for the yeah.
I think Sarah is going to pick a few questions from the chat.
Okay.
And then for like the remaining questions, we might not have time to answer them today, but to email us.
Yep. Indeed.
Sounds
so
good.
there are many questions. So, the talk was very popular. So thank you for the talk and thank you for the discussion. I wanted first to ask the first question, which was asked quite a while ago. It is about whether this could work in a dynamic causal context, for example, with panel data or time series data.
Yeah, I think that this can be possible. Yeah, I think this can be possible because there's no kind of like fundamental difficulties. Our team does have a lot of works in the dynamic temporal settings in terms of causal modeling and causal deep learning. I do believe a lot of this work can be combined with the current settings of the CINA. Yeah. But currently this work, so particularly for this paper, it's not designed for a temporal data set.
Okay, so there are actually very many good questions, and I hope that the people can reach out to you if they have them. So definitely Ran Wang had like 4 questions for you, so maybe you can reach out to them. I will ask one of the anonymous attendee because it's a bit more difficult to reach out to somebody anonymous. So the anonymous attendee was saying, thank you for the great talk. Would the causation foundation models be too task specific? It appears that the models are specific for the exposures. Does it mean for each different exposure, a different foundation model needs to be built? And then they say, sorry, I didn't finish. Sorry,
sorry.
I paused awkwardly. Sorry about that. This is not exactly an issue of the method, but just the nature of the problem. And they are also curious about how your approach addresses the zero-shot inference. Finished.
Okay, I think that there's a lot of questions entangled to each other, but I guess in terms of whether it's too task specific, I guess yes or no. Yes, in a sense that currently, so it is also one of the very common comments I get from different people is that so this is we call it like towards causal foundation models, but actually it's mostly currently only addresses one type of task, which is the kind of like the causal effects estimations given one specific exposures. So I don't think you actually need to retrain your model with different exposure though, because like it is actually symmetric. But I guess I do agree that to a certain extent it is very specific in the sense that it only solves AT estimations. So this is why later on, so we are working on follow-ups works to extend it to like a more different kind of tasks. So so I kind of forget the second half of the question though. So
right. We're also running out of time, so
yes.
maybe
okay.
We can discuss some other time. Okay, well, thank you so much for the interesting talk, Chao and Jiaqi, for the discussion. think this was an interesting seminar. Next time, we're going to have Mihaela van der Schaar from the University of Cambridge, who will talk about the causal discovery ladder, unraveling governing equations, and beyond using machine learning. Thank you all for coming. Hope you have a great week, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.